Torn by conflict and chaos, voters in Mali go to the polls for elections aimed at reuniting the West African nation. Billions of dollars in aid are at stake, and regional stability and security. But is Mali ready for elections, or is it bowing to pressure from the West? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Hanna. Mali is holding presidential elections aimed at ending 18 months of conflict. There's a lot riding on the outcome. International donors have promised billions of dollars as part of a peace deal, which must include a successful election. And a stable Mali is seen as crucial for the wider Maghreb and Sahel region. Mali is a landlocked West African nation straddling the south of the Sahara. It's a poor country, but had built up a reputation for political stability. That ended at the beginning of last year, when Tuareg separatists rebelled against the government. And in March, a group of soldiers staged a coup over the government's handling of the rebellion. The power vacuum allowed armed groups, some linked to Al-Qaeda, to take vast swathes of territory in the north. And in May, rebel groups merged and declared northern Mali an Islamic state. France sent in troops to drive them back, and now these forces are slowly being replaced by UN peacekeepers. In terms of a truce with the interim government, Tuareg separatists have agreed to allow balloting in northern areas which are largely under their control. To our panel in a moment, but first, reporting for Inside Story from Mali's capital Bamako, here's Nazanin Mashiri.
Well, here in Bamako, the voter turnout is pretty high. One person told me they've never seen an election quite like it. But the problem people are having when they get to polling stations, even if they do have a voter registration card, is they cannot find their names. Some people can't read and write, so they can't actually read their names. And some people just don't know where to go. So there's a lot of confusion around at the moment. This election is being heavily monitored by the European Union and the African Union, but they're not in key areas in the north, in Gao, Timbuktu and Kidal, so it's very difficult to know exactly what is going on up there. There's a heavy security presence across the country, not just UN peacekeepers, we've seen some here, some Nigerians, but also Malian forces too. There was a deal that was made between the government and the Tuareg rebel group MNLA to ensure that those peacekeepers and forces can be present in those areas for the election period. Now, most Malians here, when you speak to them, say that the biggest issue for them is development. They want jobs, they want infrastructure, water, electricity, the basics, food as well, and education. Security is on the agenda, but it does seem to be more of an international agenda than a Malian agenda. For the international community, Mali is essential to the security of this region, to the security of the Sahel. We know that a lot of weapons came into this country after the fall of Colonel Gaddafi in Libya. Those weapons have been spread across Central Africa. There are also issues to do with groups, armed groups connected to Al-Qaeda in the desert as well. The French forces are fighting those groups right now. So all of these issues make Mali extremely important to the world.
So there's plenty to discuss with our guests. In Bamako, Coumba Bah Traore, founder of SOS Démocratie, a civil society organization set up to engage Malians in the democratic process. Here in Doha, Sylvain Touati, research fellow at the Africa program at the French Institute for International Relations. And in our London studios is Michael Amoah, a research associate at the Centre for African Studies. Welcome to you all. Well, let's begin with Coumba Bah Traore. Logistically, did everything get in place? Do you believe the country's ready for this election?
Oh, the country has been more than ready for this election. Don't forget that before the crisis, we were already ready in 2012. So it's the crisis that came that delayed things. And the crisis also brought a lot of issues on the surface. So knowing all that, the population is more than ready. We want to be able to have a voice and decide for ourselves and select who we want to lead this country.
And
so we are ready.
And the logistical arrangements, getting some 25,000 ballot boxes into place, getting the photo ID, the biometric identity cards done. Are you satisfied from your observation that all of this has been done to the satisfaction of all?
No, I'm not 100% satisfied, but we have to understand that this is our very first time to use such tool, biometric cards. And we are using it in a very particular situation. And things are not perfect. But what we have seen, this is my fourth time voting since 1992. And I can tell you, and you can ask around, what we have seen today in terms of crowd, we had never seen it before. So even though this is a post-crisis election, but it may be by far the most democratic one we will have in terms of participation. Things are not perfect 100% because we have had a lot of issues this morning. People finding the voting booth. So we had to help each other out by sending SMS, accessing to computers so people can know where they need to vote, because the voting booth are available, information was available over 5 days ago, maybe even a week. But I guess a lot of people were not informed. So when today came, a lot of people didn't know where they needed to go to vote.
Well, Michael Amoah, if I may go to you in London, do you think that the elections were held too early?
Well, we can't say too early or too late. I mean, essentially, they were asking for 3 more months. But the situation on the ground is such that it is essential for democracy or democratic governance to assume in good time, not least because of the military arrangements as well as the escalation of internally displaced persons at the moment at some 400,000. So it's quite essential that democratic governance assumed in this time, so that some form of democracy is in place that would now provide a safe haven for citizens to begin to respond to some kind of institution that they have themselves voted for. It was quite risky for the military limbo to keep lingering on for that length of time. So I think it's timely for this election to take place.
Well, Sylvain Touati, clearly an electoral process was needed. It was a matter of timing, but many arguing that the sooner the better, precisely as we heard there from Michael Amoah, to avoid this ongoing vacuum.
I believe few weeks postponement by few weeks will have help for a better election today. Definitely we'll have some logistical problem today. Voters don't know where, some voters don't know where they need to vote. And I believe with a couple of weeks, even 3 weeks, most of the problem will have been solved. However, it's important to have this election, to have a legitimate government in Mali. It has been more than 1 year now that the crisis has been going on, and I think there is a need for legitimate government to take action and to get the things on the way, because at the moment so many issues, so many reforms are blocked, and we hope that with this election, Mali will be on the move.
Well, Coumba Bah Traore, you mentioned there that this is your 4th electoral process that you're observing. Now, in previous electoral processes, percentage polls are around 40%, even in the successful elections that took place. Are you expecting the percentage poll to be higher in this election, despite what has happened in the past 18 months, or rather because of what has happened in the last 18 months?
Because of what had happened in the last 18 months, people are now becoming aware that they need to be engaged in the life of a city. I think, and we know already by the rate of retrieval of the voting card, which reached, I think, 82% 2 days before when I saw the counting. It was 82% rate of retrieval of a voting card. So yes, definitely this year we will have more in terms of participation, and I think it has to do with the crisis.
Well, Sylvain Touati, to pick up on that particular point, there does appear to be a knowledge that this election is vital, not only for the people of Mali to get an elected government back in place, but also to convince the outside world that stability is returning?
Definitely. We have heard a lot of rumors and a lot of screams and outrage from Malian politicians saying that the international community and in particular France were pushing for the election to take place today, too early maybe, and that was the fact of France pushing for it. Also, it's important for the international community to see, to have a new government, because some of the members of the international community, such as the US, can't engage and release money until you have an elected government. So it's important for even the Malian government today to have election, to have the money released. We had a big international conference a few weeks back announcing that $3 billion will be released for the development of Mali, and this money is definitely needed when you look at the socio-economic context in Mali. And I think that's one of the crucial point here is, and for many Malians as well, is let's put this crisis behind us and let's try to move on core issues such as socio-economic development and try to deal with the problem in the north.
Well, Michael Amoah in London, that issue mentioned there, $4 billion in aid being held back until an elected government is in place. This is not blackmail, but certainly forcing the hand of the people to hold an election as soon as possible, is it not?
Well, I'm sure that the new Malian government will be happy to be in place and to be handed with $4 million to enter into development. But also, let's not forget that the international community had already put together a package to deal with the Sahelian problem, of which Mali was at the center of it. And are also sort of wanting to get back to that timetable as quickly as possible. So both the new Malian government-to-be as well as the international community are all looking forward to the disbursement of funds to do what needs to be done to restore confidence to the Sahelian region, as it were.
Well, we heard mention there of the role that France has played in this whole process, particularly in the last 18 months. Let's just take a step back to the French decision to deploy troops in Mali. France moved quickly to send in ground and air force when rebel fighters in the north began pressing further south towards Malian army bases and the capital. Defense Minister Jean-Yves Le Drian said, "The threat is a terrorist state at the doorstep of France and Europe." And French President François Hollande added to that, saying, "The terrorist groups, drug traffickers and extremists in northern Mali show a brutality that threatens us all." So clearly it was thought that events in Mali would have a knock-on effect beyond its borders. Was that threat real, or was it perhaps somewhat imagined to justify an entry into Mali at that particular time? Michael Amoah, your point of view.
Yes, we are aware that ammunition came all the way from Libya because of the Libyan revolution that took place in the Arab Spring. And as a result of that, Islamist forces had also gathered in the Malian safe haven, where there wasn't sufficient military presence there to deter them. And so there were plans afoot for Islamist rebels and Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb to actually start making incursions, not just into Mali itself, but to other, neighboring countries in the immediate Sahelian region. But of course, the repercussions of this, as you just said, is actually that these terrorists are trained who now have the access across the Mediterranean to Europe, perhaps to France, who knows. So really, it was in everybody's interests to try and make sure that this problem is actually dealt with immediately and that things are brought to a stage where it is under control. And that's why France decided to play the key role that they played. Their intervention was right in the nick of time to make sure that the rebels did not reach Bamako. Because it was quite clear if they had reached Bamako, we probably wouldn't be talking about the election that is taking place today.
Well, Sylvain Touati, that issue of French intervention in the interest, said France, not only of what was happening in Mali, but the potential threat beyond Mali's borders.
Definitely. There is this threat has been denounced by many experts for minimum since the early 2000s, mostly since 2005. You have a terrorist action from Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb in Algeria, which is the birthplace of Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, in Libya, in Senegal, in Mauritania, so in Niger. So all the countries in the region were definitely threatened by the development of a terrorist state in northern Mali.
Well, Coumba Bah Traore, I just want to bring up the issue with you of what is happening in the north of the country. Now, you take a city like Kidal, for example, there's only some 35,000 voters registered there, yet it is very important in this, what was a rebel-held area, to get a high percentage poll, to give a legitimacy to the election as a whole. So in a way, areas like this in the north are playing a far greater importance than the number of votes that will actually be counted. Do you agree with that?
Oh, definitely. We hope that the northern population will be coming out as many as in the southern or over part of the region. But what we need to understand also, a lot of the northern people have been refugees in other countries, our neighboring countries, Niger, Mauritania, or even Algeria, or Burkina Faso, Niger. So some overpopulation also came into the south. So the northern authentic electorate population is not voting there today. So the people who are voting in the north are either the one who stayed or the one who came back. So the true counting of the northern regions voting should take into account people who are refugees and people who have been displaced, who are not living in the north anymore but came to Bamako or came to other southern regions. But definitely the legitimacy of this election is going to come from all Malians, not only from the north. We all need to participate. If people in Koulikoro don't come out, that's going to impact the legitimacy of the election. We all need to participate, and we need to really come way above the usually 30% participation rate that we had had in this country, because that's also something that needs to be said. All the democratic system we had had in the past, nobody had surpassed 30% voting rate. So we had 70% of the population, so the majority, who was not participating in the debate. So this year, even if we had 60% of the population that participate, usually it's about 2 million people who vote. We had never surpassed the 3 million cap. So if we had today 4 million people voting, we have had 100% increase.
Well,
so you have your answer.
Sylvain Touati, we heard the issue there of the displaced people, estimates that some 500,000 voters or eligible voters are displaced people. How much of an issue is this in the smooth election process, and also, as we were discussing there, the legitimacy of the process?
It's an important point from the report I was reading this morning. They were issued about in the refugee camps in Burkina Faso, and almost none of the refugees there could have voted today. Also, you have to keep in mind that Malian population is traveling abroad. Many Malians are working abroad in France, in Côte d'Ivoire, in the United States, and I heard as well, and I read reports that there were many issues about the fact of many Malians couldn't vote in France, for example, today. So that's very important. But as the other speaker was mentioning, participation in Malian election has been very low during the last 4 electoral processes, and if the turnout is good, it will be a good sign for legitimacy. However, I want to mention the fact that the rush to this election is maybe going to damage the goal of it. The international community has pushed for getting a legitimate government, but if we have many issues today in terms of people not able to vote or fraud, is going to have an impact on the credibility of it, especially with the fact that we have 27 candidates, and some of them have already started to I will say, question the result of the vote.
Well, Michael, Amoah, we heard there the reference to 27 candidates taking part in this election. Now, if there is no clear-cut winner, not one candidate who gets the 50%, then there will be a runoff election on August the 11th. Is there a danger if this process does get stretched out for a longer period of time?
There's no danger at all. I mean, one realistic point to everybody is that of the 27, perhaps the top 4 or 5 4 of which are former prime ministers, are the serious contestants. So it is quite natural to expect some sort of second round. We don't know if it will actually happen, but if it does, it's not going to be a negative thing at all. In that case, then it was rather going to unite the rest of the electorate to now concentrate on distributing their votes to the last 2 candidates. And that's probably where we're actually going to see the voter participation actually playing its legitimate and serious role to the next government that will come into place.
Well, Michael Amoah, beginning to summarize here, this is a great opportunity for those in Mali to prove that it is possible to get a sense of unity despite the appalling divisions that have occurred in recent years. Do you think that there is a consciousness among the people of Mali that this is a moment in which they can fight back against the divisions of the recent past?
That's a very interesting point, actually. I mean, incidentally, you know, well, some 79% of modern Ghana actually can trace their roots back to Mali, Timbuktu, where the capital was, and that sort of coalition, that, you know, homogeneity of identity source helps unite a country. I mean, now we're talking about Mali. Now that all this has happened and there's going to be a democratic government in place, this is a serious time for the Tuareg rebellion in the north and all other socioeconomic issues to be brought to the table, where, you know, participation and inclusion becomes a key government policy. We have to remember that it is actually because of the socioeconomic and political exclusion of the Tuaregs in the north that generated the rebellion in the first place. So if I were any government that's coming into place, one of the things I really want to be working on is ensuring that the Tuaregs in the north, as well as anybody else in the country, is properly included in government, as well as included in the distribution of all resources, and that we're actually looking at developing everywhere, as important as it is, and making sure that people in the country feel like they belong to a country, can contribute to its development, as well as receive from the overall resources that is coming from central government.
Well, let's just go to Coumba Bah Traore, if I may, at this particular point, to answer to that question. Are the people of Mali aware that through their vote they can demonstrate a division, they can fight back against the events, the divisive events of the recent past?
Oh, definitely. And I've mentioned that earlier this morning to one of your colleagues. We have done some sensibilization, public awareness with regard to the voting. And the general feeling was not that we had unity or security crisis. The general feeling was that we had quality of life issues. And the voting really for us is a new beginning, and we want to choose our leader, the leader who can take us out of poverty, who can take us in the route of development. Because we know that the fight about security, all that are secondary issues compared to the fight against poverty. That's the true fight we want to face, and we don't have any unity or we don't have any security issue here. Even if we have it, it's really secondary to the major crisis we face when it comes to education, to the crisis we face when it comes to feeding ourselves, having enough to eat. It's the secondary compared to corruption. It's secondary compared to where we live. You know, building our infrastructure, having routes, having, sewages, run away, seeing our waste being removed, having roads that are quite nice to drive on. That's the true issues that we have. In Mali, you can have a general census if you wish. You will see that our main concern is not security. Our main concern is not unity, because we feel deeply we are united.
Well, the people of Mali voting for a better life. At that stage, thank you to my guests, Coumba Bah Traore, Sylvain Touati, and Michael Amoah. And a reminder, you can find this program and many more at aljazeera.com. Why not share your thoughts at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. Thanks for watching. I'm Mike Hanna. Goodbye for now.